175 years ago, Karl Marx predicted that capitalism would collapse, brought down by social injustice, overproduction, and mass unemployment driven by technological progress. It turns out he was wrong, but only because capitalism adapted. It reformed itself, addressing the misery of Victorian slums and workhouses, expanding education, improving healthcare, and creating what we now call the mixed economy. In doing so, capitalism survived and even thrived for many decades. But today, AI looks set to reshape entire industries and make millions of both high and low-skilled jobs literally redundant. This video explores the challenges and the possible outcomes of that transformation, because while AI offers humanity extraordinary opportunities for progress and prosperity, it also brings a lot of danger to the global system and even challenges sovereignty itself. And in this new era, the ownership of the means of production is going to become more relevant than ever. AI promises humanity a future once only imagined by fans of science fiction, a world where machines do the work and people are free to think, create, and live their lives more productively. Computers can design, build, transport, and even reason for us, producing more with less human effort than ever before. In theory, that means abundance, cheaper goods, shorter work weeks, and longer creative time. A world where every student has a personal tutor, every business an instant consultant, and every doctor a top-class diagnostic assistant, all available at almost zero cost. AI could lift productivity to levels never seen, erasing inefficiency, ending drudgery, and freeing billions of people from the grind of repetitive work. But there is a problem, because if AI can do your job faster, cheaper, and without rest, it doesn't just make life easier, it makes millions of workers unnecessary. And it won't just be factory workers or truck drivers who feel the impact. AI is coming for all jobs. The analysts, lawyers, accountants, marketers, journalists, coders, and consultants whose value currently comes from specialized knowledge or mental agility. Tasks that once required years of education and professional training can now be performed in seconds by large language models or automated decision systems. Artificial intelligence can write reports, design presentations, interpret contracts, and even generate code, functions that once kept entire departments employed. Inequality is another problem. Wealth becomes concentrated in fewer hands, while the working class grows poorer and more precarious. As artificial intelligence scales, the rewards flow overwhelmingly to those who own the algorithms, the data, and the computing infrastructure, not to those who simply use them. A handful of companies and investors will control the productivity of millions of digital workers, reaping enormous profits with minimal labor costs. Meanwhile, the vast majority of people, stripped of bargaining power and replaced by machines, will find their income shrinking, their job security evaporating, and their economic relevance fading. The gap between capital and labour, already wide, could be stretched much, much further. You see, every capitalist revolution produces its winners. Innovation has to be rewarded, and that is fair enough. But AI's winners are in a league of their own. A few companies now control the world's intelligence infrastructure. NVIDIA designs almost every AI chip. Microsoft, OpenAI, and Google run the dominant language models. Amazon and Meta own the cloud infrastructure that powers them. They don't just make products, they own the platforms that decide who can compete. Some commentators are calling it digital feudalism. A few lords own the data and platforms, while the rest of the economy pays rent to use them. Almost 200 years ago, Karl Marx predicted capitalism's collapse due to three things. First, what he called a crisis of overproduction. Too many goods and not enough purchasing power. Second, technological unemployment, where capitalism constantly replaces workers with machines. And third, the concentration of wealth and power. Wealth becomes concentrated in fewer hands, while the working class grows poorer and more precarious. Marx believed that this imbalance eventually becomes politically and socially unsustainable, leading to revolution. Today, these issues are back, and more relevant than ever. AI and robotics are creating overproduction by enabling companies to flood the world with cheap goods and services at minimal cost, even as purchasing power stagnates. The technology is creating unemployment by replacing not just physical labor, but white-collar work too, hollowing out the consumer base capitalism relies on. And AI is significantly increasing the concentration of wealth and power, as ownership of algorithms, data, and computing infrastructure becomes the ultimate source of profit, leaving most people with less work, less income, and less influence. Economics does have an answer. Capitalism has always been remarkably good at absorbing shocks by adjusting the balance between supply, demand, and price. It used to be that when production rose, incomes rose too, and those incomes created the demand to buy what was produced. Workers were also consumers, and growth reinforced itself in a virtuous cycle. But in a world where supply keeps growing, while demand stagnates or even falls, the system adjusts through prices. As productivity soars and automation drives costs down, prices fall until output and consumption meet again. That in itself isn't necessarily a crisis. If production costs collapse faster than prices, companies can still make profits even as goods become cheaper. In fact, this has been the story of technological progress for 2 centuries, from textiles to electronics to computing. A smartphone that once cost thousands can now be built for a few hundred. In the same way, artificial intelligence could make many goods and services, from education to medical advice, virtually free to produce. And in a world of such abundance, capitalism might continue to function, not through rising wages, but through ever cheaper access to what people need. Even those without traditional jobs could still live comfortably in an economy where necessities cost almost nothing. On a more practical basis, capitalism has another advantage. It adapts. It may bend, distort, and reinvent itself in ways Marx never imagined. When he predicted a violent workers' revolution and the collapse of capitalism, he underestimated its capacity for self-preservation. In many ways, his vision did come true, but generally not through a violent revolution. Over the 20th century, capitalism transformed itself from an unrestrained, laissez-faire system into a mixed economy, where welfare, healthcare, education, and public services account for nearly half of GDP in most advanced nations. The result was a quieter revolution, one that preserved profit while softening its harshest edges. Capitalism learned to buy social peace by redistributing part of its surplus through taxes and public spending. It expanded opportunity, stabilized demand, and gave people a stake in the system's success. That flexibility has allowed it to survive wars, depressions, and technological upheavals that Marx believed would destroy it. Today, we appear to be at a fork in the road once again, and the choice of adapting or facing significant social unrest needs to be made. If capitalism adapts again, governments will introduce policies like universal basic income, profit sharing, or AI taxes. AI becomes a public utility like electricity, powering everyone rather than enriching a few. This could preserve capitalism by broadening ownership and sustaining demand. But if it fails to adapt, then we are heading for inequality and massive unemployment. In truth, it doesn't look like much of a choice, and it seems likely that, just as before, capitalism will adapt. Universal basic income, or something like it, could emerge as a new social contract, guaranteeing that everyone's basic needs are met even as traditional jobs disappear. That would create enormous opportunities for those who can use their time creatively to learn, build, teach, or explore new ideas. But for others, it may mean uncertainty, a struggle to find purpose and identity in a world that no longer needs their labor. However, there are 2 other serious concerns about the rollout of AI. Firstly, how will governments around the world fund UBI payments? If the profits from AI flow mainly to Silicon Valley, Shenzhen, or a handful of multinational corporations, then how will London, the EU, Delhi, or Moscow pay to maintain social stability? International tax rules will have to evolve. Governments will need new ways to capture value from digital activity, not through outdated corporate taxes designed for factories and offices, but through coordinated global frameworks that reflect the borderless nature of data and AI. it is not clear how that could be achieved. And if it is not achieved, the social revolution could turn out to be an international confrontation rather than domestic unrest. Secondly, and more important, however, is the issue of sovereignty itself. Nations must develop their own AI capabilities. If they fail to do so, they'll become dependent on foreign algorithms, infrastructure, and cloud systems for everything from healthcare to defense. That would mean relying not just on the goodwill of others economically, but strategically and militarily, a dangerous position in an increasingly uncertain world. Given the recent geopolitical shocks of the past decade, from trade wars to energy crises, it looks probable that surrendering control over artificial intelligence will prove to be a serious mistake. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please like, subscribe, and comment.